HGP is an all-volunteer group that believes strongly in freedom of speech, but I must state the views expressed by myself, our reader, our speaker, HGP members, and our guests at today's meeting are not the official views of the Humanists of Greater Portland. Humanists believe in a progressive philosophy that without supernaturalism advocates living an ethical life based on science, reason, and free inquiry. The American Humanists Association has developed a list of 10 commitments. These 10 commitments are not absolute commandments, but rather a gentle guide that puts our humanist beliefs into action. Today's presentation, Finding the Balance of Intimacy, may touch on several of these commitments, including altruism, empathy, caring, ethics, humility, peace, and participation. You can find out more about these commitments on the AHA website. I would now like to welcome Al Christians, who has graciously volunteered to do our reading this morning.
Our reading today is from a book by Garrett Stewart on Charles Dickens and the Trials of Imagination. This book is about 1974. Garrett Stewart, at the time he wrote this, really loved Charles Dickens and Charles Dickens literature, and he studied it intensely, and he came up with a lot of things that he saw in Dickens that reflect on what it means to be human, i.e. language. A big part of our humanity is our language, and this book is about how Dickens used language to create not only a humorous setting, but also to convey his main points. And Stewart went on to wrote in 1990 a book that is great probably for people who are interested in our readings, because Stewart argues that literature is a vocal art, that it's the voice in the head is what really matters when you're reading a book. And so he considers literature a vocal art, but he's moved on to do a lot of work with film and such. He's a professor at University of Iowa. And this is what he wrote in his book about Dickens's use of language and verbosity in some sense. To be of worth, Dickens is reminding us the word must have a final cause beyond its own marketability. It must point elsewhere at some meaning rather than being itself the point. Too often, and nowhere more than in the press, language degenerates into a kind of wholesale commodity, a parody of the poet's autonomous handling of verbal entities. The word falls a victim to the merchandising spirit and becomes a thing. The debased poet, the journalist, or the orator trades on language, bartering it, hoarding it, making the verbal stockpiles a second-rate inventory of words to be sold off cheaply when occasion demands. In the same year that Dickens in the Pickwick Papers was mounting this attack on the squandered economies of language, Emerson was waging the same war in the American theater, found a tempting fiscal metaphor for the decline of the word. The corruption of man is followed by the corruption of language. When simplicity of character and the sovereignty of ideas is broken up by the prevalence of secondary desires, the desire of riches, of pleasure, of power, of praise, new imagery ceases to be created, and old words are perverted to stand for things which are not. A paper currency is employed when there is no bullion in the vaults. Both Emerson and Dickens detested the spurious coinages and indiscriminate expenditures of language, which were everywhere in the public writing of their day. To prolong Emerson's analogy, the paper currency of expression had become so inflated and devalued that it was already a kind of counterfeit. Yet such easy metaphors as Emerson would have admitted are themselves accessories to the crime. They are meant only to signal their own danger, to warn of the initial mistake one makes by thinking of language in this way at all, as if the exchange of words and ideas were a commerce not a communication.
Our speaker today will be taking questions throughout his presentation. Your thoughts, questions, reactions will direct his presentation. It is my sincere pleasure now to introduce Dr. Elliott Kronenfeld. I first met Dr. Kronenfeld at the Phoenix World Burn Congress, where he's done many workshops on intimacy and relationship after trauma. I watched him handle difficult questions from burn survivors with such respect and connection. And I was just thrilled when he agreed to speak to us. Dr. Kronenfeld holds a Ph.D. in Human Sexuality and a master's degree in clinical social work and communications. He is the founder and clinical director of Insight Brookline Psychotherapy. He's a TED speaker and the author of Couples with Intention, Creating and Cultivating Relationships That Matter. He's getting ready to launch a new podcast, the Dr. Elliott Show, a podcast for intentional connections, which will be airing in June of 2021. Dr. Kronenfeld comes to us from Boston, Massachusetts, and I just want to sincerely welcome him. You're in for a real treat.
I'm very excited. And what an interesting opening to have Al talk about the commerce of language, because I think that's a big part of what we're going to talk about today as well. And so I just think there's this really wonderful natural alignment with that reading. And as I was listening to it, I was jotting down all kinds of notes because so much of it resonated with me. So let me tell you, first of all, a little bit about who I am and why I'm here. So I'm a sex therapist, and my specialties are fertility, infidelity recovery, and intimacy skills. And so I really get to work with adults across the lifespan, across a wide variety of issues and concerns. And I'm being honest with you, one of the things that I love most about being a sex therapist is going to cocktail parties and people asking me what I do, because the reaction is amazing. You go to a cocktail party and you tell people you're a sex therapist, and it just changes the tenor of the party. It's been a wonderful career. And what I really love about it is working with people around the things that truly matter. If we think about the human experience, we really have 5 core human drives, right? We have hunger, we have thirst, we have pain avoidance. We will do anything to avoid pain, either physical pain or emotional pain. Affiliation. We are pack animals. We don't live in caves by ourselves. We have to live in social communities. And in fact, we use isolation as a form of torture in society. And then the 5th is libido, the sex drive. And what we're really talking about when we talk about intimacy, we're talking about at least 60% of the core human drive. We're talking about libido. We're talking about affiliation. We're talking about pain avoidance. And some days, if we're creative, we're talking about food and drink too at the same time. So it could be 100% if we're really creative, right? And so we bring this to our lives. And one of the first questions I ask clients when I first start working with them is, who taught you to be in a relationship? And what did they teach you? And I find that that is one of the most telling questions I can start with, because the answer I get most commonly is nobody, or what I saw on TV, or what my parents modeled for me. And often, what was modeled for them was either so idealistic they couldn't recreate it because they only saw the very best of the very best. It was perfect because everything else was hidden. Or it was so dysfunctional, they knew what they didn't want, but they didn't know how to get what they did want. And it is such a wonderful insight into understanding what people bring to intimacy. And so I really want to talk a little bit about Al's reading for a minute, because one of the first things I do, really to an obnoxious degree, if you want to know the truth, is I make everybody define words. For the first several weeks we're working together, somebody will say something, and I'll say, how do you define that? Like, what's that word mean? And it's not really the kind of behavior somebody expects from a sex therapist. But the truth is, I want to know that what we're talking about is clear to both of us. Because how often do we use a language around sex, intimacy, relationship, connection, emotions, and what the way that I mean it and the context that I put on it is not the way that it is understood. So let's open up this morning with doing some definitions. Let's start with the word intimacy. And by the way, as I'm talking about this, if anyone has thoughts or questions about this, really, please put it in the chat. I want this to be conversational. I want to know how things are landing with you, because that's where the real learning is, right? And so I'm going to start with a question is, what is your definition of the word intimacy? How do some of you define it?
Elliott, do you want people to type it into chat?
Yeah, let's
okay?
get some, I want to get some sense of how people define the word intimacy.
Well, for me, it's definitely changed over the decades. Certainly what intimacy was when I was 20, 18, 25 is way different from what it is now.
That's right.
I'm 70s.
Yeah. Yeah. I saw somebody said close emotional connection. Emotional, yeah. Sex. Yeah, as I'm seeing these comments come up. See, this is interesting, right? Because what we're starting to see is everyone has a slightly different take on the word intimacy. And so just for clarity's sake, for the time we're having in this conversation, the definition I would like to use for intimacy is it is the balance between safety and vulnerability. And it's our ability to balance both safety and vulnerability, because that's where intimacy can grow and thrive. Because if we are so safe that we can't be vulnerable, we are closed off. If we are so vulnerable but we don't feel safe, we're terrified and self-protected. So intimacy is our ability with ourselves and with another to be able to create that kind of balance. And as we just heard, that changes over the course of time. You know, when we first meet somebody, whether it's somebody we're interested in for an intimate relationship or a sexual relationship, a romantic relationship, or even people that we might meet at a new job, we begin to kind of assess who is this person and where do they land? And we ask fairly simple questions like, what kind of food do you like? What kind of music do you like? And the level of intimacy that's created is, are they aligned with me? The more we get to know each other, we have this assumption that a relationship is a really good, solid relationship when I know everything about you, that I am supposed to just know these things, because that's the assumption, right? We've been together so long, I should just know. But what I love that we heard is because it does change over time, we have to constantly assess, how are we balancing safety and vulnerability? Now, I'm going to keep going on the definition piece for a minute, and then we'll tie it all together. The next word I'd like to define is sex. What do people think the definition of sex is? As we start seeing in the chat, we're seeing a number of different answers. Here's my definition of sex. Sex is where you go in your head, by yourself, with another, or with others. Sex lives up here. This is the biggest sex organ you've got. And the way I try to express this so people understand it is, you could go out in public You could see somebody that you find very attractive or find something that stimulates you. You can have a memory, but you see somebody and you start to have a sexual reaction. Your breathing starts to change. You feel a little stimulation going on through your body. You get that adrenaline rush. And you finish whatever it is you're doing and you get in your car and you go home. And what's interesting is you have had a full body sexual reaction, but you've never taken your clothes off, you've never touched yourself, you've never touched another person, but you've had a visceral sexual reaction simply by where you went up in your head. And this is what happens when we start to marry sex and intimacy. When we start to look at how do we balance safety and vulnerability, and we start to manage where it is that we go up into our head when we are by ourselves or with another. It's what allows us to determine what doors are going to open and which doors are going to stay shut. What determines how far we can go before anxiety kicks in and we start to shut down, or we get caught in a loop that we can't break out of. And our ability to be really self-aware of what's going on with us and to be curious about what's going on with our partner is what allows that kind of depth of relationship to develop over time. And one of the things that I always find so fascinating is that we have, and of course, relationship and sex and gender, these are all, cultural constructions, right? This is all, created by society and determines what's right and what's wrong and what's good and what's bad. And so we get caught in those stories. And from the time we're very young, from books, television, movies, music, we are told that love and sex is what determines whether you're in a good relationship or not. Love and sex tells you whether it's going well. And I like to challenge that. I think love and sex are great, and I hope everybody gets lots of it. And you get it the way that you like it, and it feels good. But love and sex operate on a sine wave. It comes and goes. Love and sex is not the thing that holds a relationship together. What I always say the glue in a relationship is intention and curiosity. And I want to take a few minutes and define these words now and talk about what I mean by intention and curiosity. And I want to start with the word intention. My podcast is called Intentional Connections. The subtitle of my book, right? Couples by Intention. This is such an important word because to be intentional means that you have to do some things. I always say couple by intention, never couple by default. And you know what a couple by default is, relationship by default. That's where you just wake up and you keep doing it because you did it yesterday. It's just, we're in the track and that's the path we're going. And we do it because that's what we do. We stop thinking about it. We stop paying attention to it. But to be intentional means that we have to be incredibly mindful. We have to stop and we have to think about what all of our options are. We have to account them. And then we have to place a value on each and every option we've got. And then we have to rank order them in some way. We have to relate them one to another. And then we have to choose our option and we have to act on it. We are not being intentional until we act on that decision. Now, there are some times in my life when I can be quite intentional in a nanosecond. I'm a terrible caffeine addict. Terrible, actually. I drink more coffee than is humanly possible. And I can go into any coffee shop in America and I can order the most bougie coffee drink without even looking at the menu because I know what my options are. I know what I like, and I can flip that order on a dime based on my mood. But I've done all of that work in my head. There are some times when being intentional can't be second nature. Do I want to marry you? Do I want to buy this house? Do I want to talk to you about our sex life? How do I want to change our sex life? And now I need to slow myself down, and I really need to put myself into that list of options and make sure that I am showing up and being fully present. Because as I said, being intentional means making a choice, making a decision. And too often, we start to, by default, stop making choices in relationships. And oftentimes, the decision to be together is the last big major decision we've made. We made the decision to be together. We made the decision to get married. We made the decision to buy this house or to have these children. We made a decision. And therefore, there's no more decisions to be made. But to be a truly intentional couple that works from a position of intimacy, it means that we make a decision every single day. I wake up every single day and I make a choice. Today, I choose you. I choose you because you're beautiful, because you are a hard worker, because we have shared values. And I choose you when you ding the car and you pay the rent late and you leave toothpaste in the sink. But I'm going to wake up every day and make a choice because I'm really looking very intentionally at the options that are in front of me, and I'm going to choose you. And in return, I need to wake up every single day and feel chosen. I need to feel chosen because I am working really hard to make myself the best person I can be. And I need to feel chosen because, you know what, I may not be a perfect dad, but I'm a good dad. And I need to feel chosen because I left my underwear turned inside out on the floor next to the hamper, right? And it's that ability to make choice and to feel chosen. And we know when somebody chooses us, we know what that feels like. And we know when we're in a relationship by default because it's just on autopilot. The other important word here that I mentioned was curiosity. To be curious. Now, I started off by saying no coupling by default. We don't do that. We want to couple with intention. We want to be in relationship by intention. And so to be curious really challenges all of the assumptions and the things we believe we know about our beloved and the things we believe we know about ourselves. We have to question those things. And again, it really challenges that notion that if we've been together for any significant amount of time, I should know everything about you because that's what tells me we're good. The minute I think I know everything about you tells me we're in danger. Because we change over time. The person you were with 10 years ago does not exist anymore. And the person who is going to exist 10 years from now has not been emergent yet. You have to have a relationship with the person who's in front of you today, and you have to be a person in relationship as the person you are today, not the person you hope you will be or the person you were back then. Who are you and who is standing in front of you? And curiosity, the ability to challenge what we know, is what allows us to do it. It's the, how have you changed? And for anyone here on the call who has raised a child, this will be something that will resonate with you. My kids, I was telling Helen before we started, I have a son who is 20 and in college, and I have a daughter who is 15 and a freshman in high school. My relationship with my son is changing now because I don't see him every day. And I notice the difference in the way I react to my son to the way I react to my daughter, because I see her every day. And it is really hard to see how she's changing day over day until somebody comes to visit, like, wow, she got really big. And I'm like, she did? And I looked down, I'm like, wow, your pants are really short. You need new pants. Right? I'm like, I didn't realize your legs got, like, we gotta go to the store. Like, you can't be wearing those. But I hadn't even paid attention. Whereas my son comes home to visit from college and I'm like, wow. Because when we're in each other's lives with such consistency that we believe is supposed to bring comfort and intimacy, it often breeds blindness. And what we really want to be able to do is to challenge ourselves to be curious. And again, just like when we know when somebody's being really intentional with us, we know when somebody is curious about us, and we know when we feel curiosity for another. Because when I work with a couple, I love doing couples therapy. And oftentimes I'll be in couples therapy and somebody will say something and I'm like, whoa, 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 stop. And I look at the partner, I'm like, what are you curious about? What did your partner just say that raises curiosity? Because I have like 10,000 questions. What do you want to know? And the art is to teach people to be curious and to learn to grow that. It's like a muscle. We got to go to the gym and we have to work it. To grow that muscle, to be curious in relationships and to challenge all of our assumptions. Now, with that brings one of my first core relationship rules. And this rule that I have, and I think when I explain it, you'll get it. But it sounds in the beginning very counterintuitive to everything we've ever been told about relationship. Here's the rule. It's called the no helping rule. I don't help you, you don't help me, because that's not healthy for our relationship. We don't help each other. Here's what I mean by that. Because we help in relationships, usually in three core ways. The first way is, let me do that for you. Let me cut your meat for you. Let me do your chores for you. Let me take that off your plate. Let me do that for you. The second way that we often help is by advising. Oh, don't forget when you go to work, did you tell your boss this? Don't forget, did you remember to pick up the dry cleaning? You know, when you call your sister, here's really what you should say to her. We advise. And the third way that we help is probably the most insidious of all. It's when we help inside our own head and we don't even let the other person know we're doing it. You know, it's like when I think of my husband, Joe, and I think of a hard conversation we have to have, and I say, Joe's not going to handle this well. This is going to be a hard conversation for Joe. This is going to make him upset. I'm just going to handle it over here. I'm just going to go over here. I'm going to do this. Then Joe doesn't have to deal with it. I'm going to move on. And I save Joe from that hardship. Here's the challenge with helping, regardless of how we do it. It is the best intention thing we do and the most harmful. Because when we help in any one of those three ways, we do it predicated on some assumptions that I'm more capable than you, I'm smarter than you, my way is the best way, you can't do it without me, you are incapable, I don't trust you to manage this well. All kinds of assumptions that drive us to help. And secondly, what it does, it actively limits your partner's growth and development. See, because as adults, the way that we grow, the way we develop is we wrestle really hard things to the ground. We struggle with it. Yeah, we're going to get hurt. Yes, we're going to get banged up a little bit. We'll get some bruises along the way. But that's how we learn. That's how we gain insight. Think about your own lives and the greatest challenges you've ever had. I would venture a guess it's also where you got your greatest insight and realized you were stronger than you ever believed you could be to get you to where you are today. And when our partner doesn't let us learn and doesn't let us grow and doesn't let us develop, we are being hampered.
Elliott,
Now,
I've
yes.
got a question here from Joyce, or a comment, I think. I have never known all about my partner at any stage, not just through the changes of time. I don't ask the questions.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And it's because we're not taught to ask the questions. I think, Joyce, you're absolutely right. We're not taught to ask the questions. Everything we've been told about relationship is based on assumption that a good relationship is a relationship without challenge. A good relationship is one where you're getting laid all the time. A good relationship is one where everything is happy and conflict-free.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But that's not an authentic relationship. And it's not one where both partners are awake. Now, the other thing I will tell you about this no helping rule, because with every rule, there's exceptions, right? There are two exceptions to the no helping rule. The first exception is if your partner asks for your help
Mm-hmm.
and you agree to do it. Your partner can ask for help and you can agree. You can also say no. And the second is if you offer help and your partner agrees to accept it, and your partner can say no to your offer. But the limits of this help is that it is specific and it is time limited. It doesn't give you carte blanche to start helping all over your partner's life. Right? I say to Joe, would you mind helping me get the groceries from the car and putting them away? That means take them from the car, take them out of the bag, put them in the cabinet, get rid of the bags. It doesn't mean to help me menu plan. It doesn't mean salt my stew pot or chop my carrots. I didn't ask for that. And it doesn't mean the next time I go grocery shopping that I need your help either. It's this time. And it's about living in the moment and not trying to have global approaches to your relationship, but having intimate, intentional, and curious moments in your relationship. And it is about really being able to see your partner and your relationship for who they are and what it is. Now, there's a concept that I ask couples all the time that they often don't understand the question. So I'll ask the question and then I'll give it some flavor. It's that every relationship has a purpose. Every relationship has a purpose. What is the purpose of this relationship? Why are you in it? What is the thing that keeps you here? And what is your role in this relationship? What's your job? What's your job? And what did you learn? Now, I'm actually going to draw a picture for you because what typically happens is when we look at the scope of relationship, let's say you've had a 30-year relationship. Here's a timeline. This is the time you met, and this is where we are today. This is your 30-year span of time. But that's not one relationship. We know that. There's actually many relationships in there. And what I ask people to think about is, where did the relationship change? What were the big mile markers for you? And so one partner may say, we had 4 major relationships. From the time we met until the time we moved in together, that was the first relationship. Things changed after we moved in, and it was that whole process of getting married. Oh, and then we had our first child. That significantly changed our relationship again. So it's this relationship when we were actively parenting. And then I noticed the next major relationship was when we moved. We moved out of state. We moved from California to Oregon. That fundamentally changed our relationship.
Elliott?
And so this partner says, I see 4 significant sections in the relationship. But the other partner says, I actually have some different ones.
That's perfect right there.
Right? So for me, it's from when we met until we got married. Moving in didn't change things much for me, but boy, getting married and having kids did. And then when my mom died, that fundamentally changed things for me. And then when we made the decisions around retirement, it was about the role that I was playing in my life, not where we lived, that fundamentally changed how I saw who we were as a couple and my role in this relationship. And being able to understand that if we're being intentional and curious in a relationship, that we don't see it the same way, and we don't see the shifts in the same way, and that's fine. Mm-hmm. But in each of these relationships that we're in, I'd want to know, what was your job in that relationship? What was the key thing that kept you there? And what did you learn? What worked really well? And what was really hard? What allowed you to progress down the timeline? Because I would venture that not all of these were happy times or easy times. And there could be all kinds of mile markers. It could be a health crisis, unemployment, it could be all kinds of things. But being able to really create, when we're talking about intimacy and balancing safety and vulnerability, we need to be able to talk about intimacy, not just from an emotional, a physical, or an erotic perspective, but a relational perspective as well. And being able to find the language and the questions to be able to work with each other to discover all of that. Now, this is a hard body of work. So one of the things that I do is I get people to start thinking about all these things we have to be talking about, and how do we use curiosity as a strategic relationship skill? Like, I get it, it sounds right, but how do I do it? I have this exercise that I do with couples, and I call it the listening hour. And what I ask couples to do is to practice listening, because we're never taught how to listen. We're often told that, active listening is when we look at somebody and go, right? And we make those funny faces and those little grunt noises, and that's supposed to let people know that we're listening. What that means is we're not talking. It doesn't mean that we're understanding. Because ultimately, we all want the same thing. We all want the same thing. We want to be seen, we want to be heard, and we want to be understood. And when we feel seen, heard, and understood, we can show up. We can't show up if we don't feel seen, heard, and understood. So how do we do that? How do we work with somebody to make sure they know that? which is why we do the listening hour. Now, it sounds fundamentally very easy, but it's actually very challenging. What I say is I want you to have a very special date with your beloved. By the way, this works great for parents with kids, with best friends, with working with your parents, right? It's a fundamental relationship skill. It's when we talk from the I perspective, and many of you may have heard that before. So instead of saying you do this and you say this and you do that, we don't wag the finger. I think, I feel, I want, I desire. The only thing I can know is I. So I only speak from the I perspective. I don't tell you what you think. I don't tell you what you feel. I don't tell you what you do. What I tell you is how I react and how I receive it, right? Now, with this, the listening part is the hard part. Because when we're listening, we actually have two really critical jobs to do at the same time. The first is to bear witness. I have to acknowledge that what you're saying. If I'm going to talk from the I perspective, I want you to listen from the you perspective. So when I'm listening, anything anyone says to me is never about me. It can't hurt me. When somebody tells me, quite frankly, that I'm being a jerk, or, Elliott, you're such an asshole. Like, why are you being such a jerk? Right? That can't hurt me because it's not about me. It's about how they're feeling. It's their reaction. It's the pain they're in. And if I don't make it about me, but I say, wow, this person's really hurting, then I can make it about them. And then I don't, if I'm going to bear witness and I don't make it about me, it means I don't go in my head and I don't become defensive. I don't start becoming judgmental. I don't start predicting what you're going to say next. Oh, I've heard this before. I know exactly where this is going. I don't do anything about, it's not about me. It is always about you. So I don't have to do any of that work. I don't have to protect myself. I don't have to predict. I don't have to judge. I don't have to defend. I don't have to strategize. You know that moment, right? When you think to your mind, go ahead, take a breath. I dare you to take a breath because I got something to say. And when I'm doing that, it means I'm not listening. It means I'm in my own head working my own story. I'm not being curious about you, and I'm not showing up for you. This is really hard to do. And then the second critical job is to be curious. It's to ask questions. Your job is to keep pulling, get everything you can. You think I made you really mad? Tell me why. How often do I do that? Am I the only person who makes you mad in that way? On a scale of 1 to 10, how mad are you? Tell me more. Tell me. I want to see what your experience is. And if you can center yourself enough to ask questions rather than to defend, to ask questions rather than to explain, to ask questions rather than to judge, that conflict goes from up here to down here. And that person goes from being isolated to feeling connected. Tell me about you. I'll tell you my side of the story, but we can have that as a separate conversation. You want to know why I did that? I am happy to share that. But first, let's stick this with you. Like, I'll tell you about me and what my thought process was, but I'm not done listening to you yet. Give me more. Tell me how it hurt you. How did it throw you off the rails? Because I can't bring myself to the story until I know who you are in this moment. And so intimacy, this is real intimacy, and it is hard work. This is not easy. And this is a muscle. It's like going to the gym. You got to work that muscle out. And it starts feeling really weak, but it gets stronger and stronger over time, right? It gets stronger and stronger over time. Now, there's two other pieces to this, and then I really want to open it up to discussion because I know there's a lot here. I'm going to say two more things. The first thing is, what is conflict? And because there's a couple of ways that we think about conflict, right? For some people, conflict is a boundary violation. I laid out a boundary and you crossed it, which tells me you don't respect me. For some people, conflict is we're not aligned. We're not rowing the boat in the same direction. You're going one way and I'm going another. That's a conflict. For some people, conflict is a lack of personal respect and somebody who really challenges the hierarchy. You're not respecting my position on this. And for some people, conflict is a lot like the way the Supreme Court talks about pornography. I'll know it when I see it. It could be the tone of your voice, your body language, the energy you walk into a room. It could be the way you huff. Because I'm sensing something. I can't name it, but I feel it. It's when I feel it. But regardless of how we define conflict, and we all define conflict differently, the goal is to get it early rather than to let it go. Because what happens typically is one partner starts to feel conflict and the other person is blissfully unaware that that conflict is happening until something happens and there's a fracture. And we have a couple of options here. The other partner can go, oh yeah? Yeah? I'll match you. You want to do that? Watch where I go. Oh no, you didn't. One option is we could have this conflict and we both go, oh no. And we go into avoidance. The other option is somebody can say, wow, that feels awful. Let me hear you. Let me hear you. Now, we often will have conflict because we have forgotten to be curious and intentional. And sometimes we have conflict because we have language that is misunderstood. And one of the most misunderstood words in relationship is the word yes. Yes. So here's how the word yes is deeply misunderstood. We have one version of the word yes, which actually doesn't mean yes at all. It actually means shut up, leave me alone. I'm trying to avoid this conversation and I'm going to kick the can down the road as far as I can. And hopefully you'll forget about it. You ask me something, I go, yeah. And I'm like, stop talking. I gotta go. Yep, got it. I gotta go. Then we have a really confusing yes, which is when I agree with you. I agree. You know, my husband Joe says to me, oh, wouldn't it be nice to take a vacation in Aruba? Yes. Boy, that sounds amazing. And he comes home with 2 tickets to Aruba. And I lose my mind. What have you done? I can't go to Aruba. That doesn't fit my schedule. But you said yes. I said, yes, it would be great. I can't believe you went and bought tickets to Aruba without talking to me. I talked to you. No, you didn't. right? Because the third kind of yes is commitment. That's where we have clarity. So one of the things that's very, very interesting is my husband and I, we're very different people. I'm somebody who lives very large, and I'm always off on some adventure or another. And I have had to learn over time that I also make decisions very quickly. Oh, let's go. And I do it and I commit and I'm ready to go. He's not that way. And it was a little painful to learn that lesson. And so now I do things like very, very clear. I'll say, listen, I have a question that I'd like to ask. And the answer I'm looking for is yes, okay. I tell them, if there's a right answer or wrong answer, I'm going to let him know up front. I'm not going to make him guess. There's a right answer here. And the right answer is yes. Before I even tell him what the question is. I'm like, okay, here's the question. I want to go take this trip by myself without you. And he'll say, huh. I'll be like, what questions do you have? What do you need to know? How much is it going to cost? When are you going to go? How are we going to take care of this? How are we going to, like, I've got answers for all of that. I'll answer all of that. I'll be like, so what's your answer? And he'll say, it always comes with a big huff. Okay. I'll say, all right, I'm going to ask the question again, because if you say yes, okay, a second time right now, I'm going to buy tickets. What do you say? I get the second huff. Yes, okay. Thanks. Gotta go. Click. Because now I've got commitment. Because now we have clarity. There's no going back. There's no changing minds. We are clear. Now, if later on down the road he's unhappy with his decision, I don't have to help him with that because there's no helping rule. That's his problem to solve. He can come and talk to me about it and I will listen and I will be curious, but that's not my problem to solve. Anyway, I've been talking for such a long time. I really would love to open it up. Thoughts, questions, anything. What would people like to talk about?
Elliott, there's a question from Gail. And any thoughts for single folks who are unlikely to find a partner, but feel one can have satisfying living alone?
Absolutely. Well, because the other thing, and Gail, thank you for asking that question, because I think the things that we're talking about today aren't just romantic partners. All of this works for all kinds of relationships. Intimacy. I mean, how many of us, the most intimate relationship we have is with our barber or hairdresser? I mean, not me, but some people, right? That we have intimate relationships with all kinds of people, family members, children, best friends, siblings. It all works. And I think that if somebody is not in a primary intimate relationship and they choose not to be, good for you. Nobody says you have to be. If you choose not to have children, I think that's a wonderful decision if you've made the decision. But I think what we're talking about really is for all relationships.
We've got a note from Helen Ost. If a person's yelling, but I'm not mad. I think it's that reaction of someone's yelling, and how do you stay calm?
So I have this really wonderful couple that I've worked with for such a long time, and the husband kept saying to the wife, "Why are you always yelling at me?" And she finally looked at him in my office one day in a very loud voice with lots of hand gestures. She goes, "I'm not yelling. I'm Italian." And I just thought it was hysterical because it's cultural for her, right? It was for her. It was just how her family taught. And I think the word yelling is important for us. That's one of those words that needs to be defined, because sometimes yelling is about volume. It literally is. I need you to turn the volume down. And one of the things I used to say to my kids all the time is, my ears can't hear that volume. So if you're yelling at me, my ears can't hear that. You need to turn that down if you want me to listen to you. But yelling sometimes is about intensity. It is about the way we clip our words, the way we purse our lips, the exacting tone we use when we're trying to get something across. See, yelling is one of those things. It's like if I said, close your eyes and picture the color yellow, I can guarantee that there are no two people on this call who envision the same shade of yellow. And the same is true with yelling. What do you mean by yelling? And if you're in a relationship with anybody and there's this yelling factor, let them know what you mean by yelling. Because most people just assume, well, my volume isn't up, or I'm just excited, or I'm passionate. Like it's about breaking down that social construct of yelling.
There's a comment from Dorman. He's he's really enjoying your presentation. And just a comment, one time when they moved from one house, they had to move the bed to make processes happen. And he also was hoping you could recommend, do you have a book or something that can be purchased? He's to learn more about what you're talking about today.
Well, yes, my book is called Couples by Intention. You can find it on Amazon, or you can go to couplesbyintention.com. And everything we've talked about today is in my book.
Okay.
And my book is really set up. I don't want to be self-promoting, but I want to tell you what you're getting, is that there's a bunch of exercises in the book where you can do it, and you can do it with your partner. And I have questions for reflection, and I have exercises in there to challenge your assumptions. The listening hours defined in there, all kinds of exercises are defined in there. So you can literally sit down and work through it with somebody or by yourself.
Okay. There's Dave DiNucci. I wanted to come on and ask you a question. Dave, come on in.
I was just wondering, so yes, a lot of your talk focuses on this word intention or intentional and relationships, and what is your job in the relationship, and why are we in this relationship, etc. It seems to me like we form relationships constantly. Sometimes they're just a minute long when we're running into people, or sometimes a short, brief encounter might lead to a longer relationship. And it seems very rare from the beginning that we have any intention for the relationship. We find out what the intention is, in a sense, once we understand more about our respective intentions in some cases, but sometimes skills or just the way that we interact. And I guess I'm an example of someone I don't know that I've ever been on a date. I mean, some people go on dates. Those are intentions to find out more about, a relationship, or an intent to get into a relationship. I'm just wondering, when are you considering that a relationship is beginning, if you think of a relationship as having such a thing about people have jobs in the relationship, and there's a reason that you're in it, and all that sort of thing?
I love this question. Thank you, David. I agree with everything you've said. Every relationship has a beginning, a middle, and an end. Every relationship. And we never know when we're in the middle of a relationship. And sometimes we don't know when we're in the end of the relationship until we look behind us. Oh, that's where it ended back there. That's when I should have left way back then. We've all had a few of those, right? And sometimes those relationships extend well beyond death. My grandmother was in a 45-year marriage with my grandfather after he died. She was still in that marriage with him. He died before I was born, but he was alive in my life because she made sure of it. Sometimes, to your point, David, relationships are 30 minutes, beginning, middle, and done, and just as powerful. I think one of the most powerful relationships I've ever had was a man that I had a conversation with on the beaches of Cape Cod. And that 30-minute conversation when I was 25 years old fundamentally changed my life. I don't even know the man's name. I never saw him again. I was on Cape Cod in February in the cold, miserable. It was my birthday. I was in a terrible relationship. And this guy's walking down the beach. He's like, "What's wrong with you?" I'm like, "Leave me alone." And he's like, and he sat down next to me and we just talked for 30 minutes. And this man who had such kindness and generosity for my humanity left me with some words of wisdom. And I went home that day and things started clicking. Never saw him again, don't even know his name. And I will never forget this man as long as I live. Always very grateful for him. But so part of this is that, I mean, we're in relationship because we are social beings with everyone we come in contact with. I have a relationship with the person who's giving me my coffee at Starbucks, right? And I know what that relationship is, right? I'm going to be kind to you. You're going to be kind to me. You're going to offer service. I'm going to offer compensation. And hopefully we'll leave each other with just a drop of happiness for the course of the day as I go get myself caffeinated. And if I keep going back to the same Starbucks, that relationship, if I start seeing the same person over and over again, maybe it gets a little deeper, a little more personal. But we know what the purpose of that relationship is. And, you know, and the purpose of the relationship changes over time, which is why when we look at things like, you know, the timelines, right, it changes. And it's about our ability to say, how does the purpose exist today? And we just have to be open that that purpose changes.
Thank you, Elliott. I have a question from Constance. She was looking for suggestions on how do we teach our kids to be in healthy relationships. That, you know, that idea that you started with, that how did you learn about relationships?
This is such an important question. Yes, please talk to your kids. Please talk to your grandkids. Please talk to all the children in your life, however you know them, about what a healthy relationship is and model it. You know, I feel for my kids. First of all, it has got to be hard to be raised by a gay sex therapist as a father. Like, that has just got to be difficult. Because we're going to talk about stuff. I mean, we grew up talking about all kinds of stuff over the dinner table. And, you know, I was just very clear with my kids that, you know, you have to be curious about yourself before you can be curious about another person. And, you know, oh my God, funny story. My son, when he was in high school, he always knew that if any of his friends needed a ride, my son was an elite soccer player, and if any of his friends needed a ride home, he wouldn't even have to ask. Of course, I'd give him a ride home. But Michael, my son, whenever he wanted to ask me to give his friends a ride home, he would always race to the car first before they got to the car. And I knew all these kids, right? And he'd always have to inspect the car first to make sure I didn't have any books laying out that he'd have to ask me to put away before his friends got in the car, right? Of course, all his friends were asking me all of the questions, and like his friends would come over and we would talk about sex and bodies and relationships and girlfriends because their parents weren't talking to them about it. You know, and here they are, they're now in college, and I still get phone calls from them from all over the country. "Hey, Elliott, listen, my girlfriend and I, this is going on." I'm like, "All right, let's talk about it." Because nobody else was talking to them. It's just like for ourselves and the relationships we're in, we have to teach our children language. We have to teach them to listen. We have to talk to them about curiosity. We have to challenge the scripts we've been given as according to gender, right? Because when the doctor, when you're born, looks between your legs and says, "It's a boy" or "It's a girl," from the moment you take your first breath, that very first moment, before you take your second breath, impressed upon you is the historical weight of everybody that came before you, based on your family's intersectionality and their religion, their race, their immigration story, their economics, their education, their political leanings, their geography, all of it, right? All of it. All of that historical narrative from all of the people that came before you. And then what that creates is a script that you now need to follow moving into the future. And you haven't even taken your second breath yet. And we spend the rest of our lives trying to situate ourselves in that script. And where does it work for us and where does it not work for us? Because again, we know when there's dissonance with that script and we feel that discomfort in our lives. And, you know, whether you're dealing with gender, race, economics, education, whatever that dissonance is, we feel it so viscerally inside of us, but we have to battle all of those sociocultural scripts that are put on us before breath too. And so teaching children and empowering children to be able to use their voice and to use their curiosity and to be intentional, to show up for themselves first, is what's going to allow them to challenge those social scripts about what relationships are supposed to be. Thank you, Hallmark and Disney, Kardashians and everybody else, so that they can write their own scripts.
Elliott, wow. I have a comment from Hank. It seems worth mentioning that what folks label emotional infidelity might be about one member of a relationship complaining that they see the other member of the relationship having this intimacy experience with someone else and not them, or should not be with anyone except them. That, yeah, it's more the deep friendships that people have.
That's right, Hank. That's exactly right. And this is what my whole TED Talk was on, was this very question. Because when we have this talk about scripts, right? We have this script that up until this youngest generation, the script is you should expect monogamy. And I think monogamy is great. It doesn't work for everybody. And I think you have to figure it out for yourself. This younger generation, the social script is nobody's supposed to be monogamous and everyone's supposed to be poly.
Yeah.
And so the younger generation has the same problem, but in reverse.
Wow.
And so when we're working with teenagers and college students, they are struggling with how are we making connections, but they're the flip conversation. Now, I want to tell you a little bit about my TED Talk when you watch it, because monogamy, you talk about emotional monogamy, and we talk about sexual monogamy, but we can have all kinds of infidelity, right? Infidelity, the root of that is fidelity. Fidelity means trust. So an infidelity is anything that breaks the trust. That's literally what infidelity means. Anything that breaks trust. And so it could be having sex with another person. It could be having an emotional relationship with another person. It could be the fact that you're taking common money and going out gambling and spending it. It could be the fact that you are choosing your mother over me. It could be your political perspectives. It could be how we find meaning in things, right? And how aligned do we need to be? And so this issue of fidelity and infidelity is realizing that there's a you, a me, and a we. And we have to figure out in all of these areas, we have to have this conversation with curiosity and intention to negotiate where is the you, where is the me, and where is the we? Because the goal is not to be so perfectly aligned and in sync on all of these issues. It's to go off and be a unique, interesting person so that I can be curious about you. Because if you're not off being your own authentic self, then what's there to be curious about? And so if you do watch the TED Talk, which you can find on the couplesbyintention.com webpage, you'll see, if you click on about the author, you'll see the TED Talk, and then you'll see the post interview, which may also give you some insight. What I will tell you about the TED Talk, if you watch it, just so you have a point of perspective, is that first of all, I was deathly ill. I was so sick that day, and so my energy is a little low, and at one point my throat seizes up. But you'll look beyond that. You'll be kind. The second thing was that I keep talking about the word connection. Connection. What I wanted to use was the word monogamy, but I filmed my TED Talk at the John F. Kennedy Presidential Library, which is, if you've ever been, is the most gorgeous place, overlooking Boston Harbor. It is just stunning, in the middle of Camelot. Except the curator of the library refused to let me use the word monogamy and infidelity. Out of all of the TED Talks that day, mine was the only controversial one because it dishonored the legacy of the president. It was kind of his brand, wasn't it? Come on, right? Like nobody knew. So we agreed that I would use the word connection and not infidelity. So when you hear the TED Talk and you hear me talk about connection, I want you to hear the word monogamy as well. And you'll see all of the different spectrums where this kind of infidelity can happen. And to Hagen's point, an emotional infidelity is just one of those spots, but it all works the same way. And we have to be able to negotiate where is the you, where is the me, and where is the we. And we have to be clear about it up front.
Okay. Mike Berchet says, partners who had abusive childhoods, how can one approach abuse survivors without getting sucked into their drama? One wants to be of help, but may end up in over their heads.
Yeah. Mike, this question is a much bigger question than I think that we can really delve into here. But what I will tell you, first of all, the no helping rule is really important here. Mm-hmm. And the healthiest relationships have the clearest boundaries. I will say that again, really take this in. The healthiest relationships have the clearest boundaries. And if that trauma, because what we're talking about here is trauma, and whether it is an abusive childhood, it's sexual trauma, or any other kind of trauma, right? Trauma happens in all kinds of ways. The trauma needs to be resolved. And, that's where you really need to work with a really good therapist. If the partner would be willing to do individual therapy, or at least see a couples therapist to make sure that those boundaries are in place.
I have a thought, though, that when you were talking about listening, that is the really scary thought of, to me, that I can feel that fear coming up. Like, how do you stay just not being fearful, like running in the other direction, because it just gets over too much. It's scary to hear bad things about yourself, or things that I just find that. How do you keep that fear under control?
Well, and you're absolutely right, Helen. And that's why practicing before you're in a critical situation is important, which is why I like to do things like the listening hour. Because if you practice listening hours, as an exercise, just what a fun day, we're going to get some cheese and crackers and I'm going to listen to you for now. I'm going to invite a story and you're going to tell me a story. And I'm just going to practice listening. And then you're going to take me on a date. Maybe we'll go for a walk around the pond and you're going to invite a story and you're going to listen. Okay. And we're going to practice that so that when the critical moments come, we've got that muscle. We've got that muscle. But to try to build the muscle in a critical moment, this is like going to the gym. You don't just go to the gym once and assume you're going to be fit. You have to do it regularly. And so practicing listening all the time is what allows you to do it when it's hard.
That makes perfect sense, right? You can't learn those things when you're in a conflict.
That's right.
You have to have those skills already. That makes perfect sense. Well, I don't see, does anybody have, we've got time for probably one more question or comment. Does anybody want to, here we go. Dave DiNucci had a thought. Come on, Dave.
Yeah, my question is about boundaries. I understand how healthy it is to set boundaries, especially with regards to yourself and what you're willing to put up with or what you would like to put up with. But I've also found people setting boundaries that go way beyond themselves. I mean, they say, I'm just setting a healthy boundary, which means you can't go to this place, you can't talk with this person, etc. Where do you see boundaries getting unhealthy and where are they healthy?
Well, David, that's not a boundary, that is a directive. A boundary is something that is negotiated, it is commonly understood, and it is commonly supported. And a boundary can move over time. I like to use sports, because sports is such a great way. So if you watch football, that big white line around the football field, the gridiron, that is a physical boundary, right? The fans stay in one spot, only certain players get on the field. You know, there are rules and everyone understands the rules. And as long as you're playing by the negotiated rules, we have a fun game. But when somebody breaks the rule, right, depending on how bad the challenge is, either we just reset and keep playing because that's part of the fun of the game. But if it's a really serious fracture, then there's a consequence to it. But all of those things are negotiated and commonly understood and commonly supported before the game begins. And it's not put upon anybody. It's not one party giving a directive to the other. It has to be negotiated. And that's the key word. It's not a directive. It is a negotiation.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, Elliott, I'm afraid we've come to the end of our time. This has just been phenomenal. And we do have afterthoughts after these few announcements, and that you're welcome to stay on. But I know you have. It's later in the afternoon in Boston, and you probably have time with your family. So please know you'd be very welcome, but please do not feel any way obligated. But
yeah, it's just become customary for us to show our appreciation by sending our speakers a mug so that you can show your other friends that we exist. And
I love it. As a coffee drinker, I'm very excited.
Oh,
that's right.
That's a great gift. Thank you.
Oh, this was just been wonderful. I took notes and I've written everything down, and I'm hoping to get your book. So what a just a wonderful meeting. I'm so pleased. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you all so much. It has been such a pleasure to be with you today. I've been looking forward to it for a long time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.